Hi guys, welcome back to my Stranded Alien Dawn hard mode playthrough. If you haven't been watching along so far, we got the base set up, had some issues, fixed those issues. Last episode I got the crafting area set up and I also got the defences kind of nailed down. Now this isn't really a let's play, this is more of a let's guide in that I'm narrating over the top, so just so you're aware of that up front if you haven't been watching. We're also back to sequential this time because the last video was really a case of I needed to group up a lot of things. But in this one here, I thought it might be beneficial to actually see things as they were done. As you can also see, the first point of order for me was to finally get my kitchen sorted out. What I did was once it was all built and I had the wall partition laid out, I also put out a couple of freezers and moved my cooker and current freezer over. The reason that I do this is so that my cook really doesn't have to move very far when they are cooking. They can literally just make the thing and then throw it into the freezer when they're done. I think I might have actually messed up at the beginning though and forgotten to actually set my freezer that I wanted to store my food as my food, but I'll sort that out later on. I also started doing a little bit of housekeeping that I've been neglecting at this point. Things like reducing the amount of farming that needs to be done just because I was producing so much stuff. Really, that 100% farmland just produces so much. You really do have to keep an eye on it. You end up with just things just sitting around for ages. I also started sending Ken off on more expeditions in the hope of getting potentially some research that will make my life a bit easier, the electronics printing, and maybe another survivor. Neither of those panned out. I actually ended up just never getting more than 6 survivors all the way through this playthrough. And yet another thing that I had been meaning to do for a long time but hadn't got round to, I started to actually get the rec room done properly. As you can see here, I just started off by putting out a table with some more chairs so that people weren't standing up. Yeah, probably should have enough tables and chairs for all the people you have in your base. Just throwing it out there. I apologise that the video has jumped forwards about 20 days here. I accidentally deleted that footage. That was what I used in my updated defence video. But as you can see, I have put out 6 sofas by this point. But that's really the only changes that I made inside the base there. I did start to do some research at this point as well. I wanted the brick rooms for upgraded walls or fences. I also wanted the oil extraction so that I could make tasty recipes. And the battery optimization is always nice. It doubles up the amount of capacity in your batteries and allows them to actually output more, so you need less batteries. You can also see at this point that I do have the outer wall completed. I have it expanded out to, I think it's 10 blocks all the way out. And I decided to put some traps on the inner wall there, just in case anything does break through. The Junos, or if you haven't actually observed them, they will be the horned creatures. They do still like to go through the wall, but later on in this video, you will see that the wall is performing its purpose quite nicely. If you were watching along with the previous video or you watched the defense video that I did, you will see that it actually does exactly what I wanted it to do. And I also add a few other things in later on in the video. The next point of order was to increase the number of stoves in the kitchen up to 4. That is what I found you kind of need to have to efficiently create 2 sets of tasty recipes or chef's recipes. I'll show you the reason for that later on. These are set on a day-night sensor, and because my cooks are set onto a nighttime schedule, they only come on at nighttime. Just so you're aware of that. That's something that will save you quite a bit of electricity if you do decide to go down this route. But also, I will say that this is something that it does depend on how many survivors you have and how many people you have available to be cooks with how viable that becomes. You can also see that I was sending Ken off on even more expeditions, and yeah, I didn't get any new research or survivors. Not that I'm salty about that at all. But lack of saltiness aside, this is also the point where I decided to turn Vanessa into a secondary cook. She was still primarily a farmer, but I was also trying to train her cooking skill up to the point where she could make tasty recipes. One of the things I keep meaning to mention in these videos is that if you are doing butchering and you only have one person set to butcher like I do here, it's really important that to make that efficient, you actually manually set them to butcher things. Because if you don't do that, they will butcher 1 or 2 things and then they'll bugger off to put that down, which kind of just reduces the amount of stuff that they'll actually move. They can actually carry, if they've got, I think, decent physical, like well over 400 meat. I know I've definitely seen Ken carrying 400 meat before. But if you just let them butcher it on their own, what they'll do is they'll just walk away once they've butchered one or two things. It seems to group it up into small amounts, and it does that, walks away, comes back. It's far more efficient just to tell them to butcher a big chunk of things at the same time, and they'll do that all in one go, pick up all the meat, carry it back. Once I got the process completed, I just set them to create a nice amount of vegetable oil and just do that until I had 150. The good thing about this is it does seem to be a high priority. Your crafters do seem to do the oil before doing anything else, which is quite nice. Although I do feel like bandages should be higher than oil, which they apparently aren't. So I don't know what's going on there. Once I had the oil production sorted out, I could start making tasty recipes. The first one that I went for was bread. But as you can see with the way that Emmeline is cooking, she produces about 60% of it at the stove and then she walks away. The rest finishes up in the stove itself. That's kind of cool, but it does produce a little bit of a logistical problem. While the recipe is finishing up, you have this quite long period of time where your cook isn't actually cooking. So they'll tend to walk away and do something else, which means that just the fact that they've walked away, even if they come straight back, that reduces the efficiency. The only way I've found to get around that is to have two stoves that are doing the same recipe, so they can go back and forth, and while one's finishing up, they can start on the other one. It also produces a secondary logistical problem in that if you have two stoves that are producing a recipe, say the first one finishes up, but the second one is the process of cooking, your cook will walk over and just dump those things out so that they can start cooking the next recipe. So you then need a second set of two stoves for your other recipes you want to create. So it's really cool that they can kind of double up on their efficiency, but it also means that you then need to kind of quadruple up on the stoves that you have so that you can take advantage of that efficiency. Once I got my brick room research done, I made sure I had a stockpile to store bricks and then just had a nice amount of them being produced on the furnaces after I had produced my alloys. The amount of furnaces that I had here seemed to be more than enough to keep me stocked with alloys and then bricks on top of it. Even though I love the way the stone looks, it is still a limited resource, and the brick is also an upgrade to the stone. So you can produce bricks forever just with like a very small hayfield. I've actually got my hayfield not set to harvest for a long time, and I still don't go through all the hay that I had stockpiled up. One of the things that I wanted to show was how that outer wall does actually help to prevent things from going to the inner wall. You can see here on this attack that quite a few of the animals did spawn close enough that they aggroed onto the wall, and some of them start going towards the front of the base and some of them start going towards the back of the base. It just allows you to have a little bit of time to deal with it, and it also moves them away from the main group, so it gives you a chance to aggro them away. As you can see here, I had more than enough time to get out there and deal with that group that was moving towards the front of the base. It's just really there to delay them and to separate them from the group so that you can attack them without drawing the aggro or drawing the ire of hundreds of animals at the same time. You're just dealing with one or two. I did kind of mess up with the ones that were going down the other end of the fence. I should have just left that. But the main attack wasn't too much of a problem. And because those ones that had spawned close hadn't gone and weakened the wall at all, I was able to deal with the main attack without a problem and then do a little bit of clear up later on. One of the things I have noticed, if you look on the right hand side of that attack there, is that when things do come in and attack a wall, if they get caught by a trap, it seems to reset their pathing. So whereas those ones, they went straight for the wall, they tried to attack the wall, they got done by the traps, most of them just turned around and then started to path again. It's just something to keep in mind. That's the main reason I've got those traps along there, is not really to cause them any damage or necessarily kill them, because those big creatures is not going to cause a problem. But you can see the mass majority of those things, they're not being hit by my people. They're getting hit by the traps, and when they get out of the traps, they go back to pathing as they should. I don't know what's going on there, but that's just something I've noticed and I've shamelessly taken advantage of. I don't think any of the wall actually got destroyed. Some of it needs repairing, but I don't think anything got destroyed on the inner wall anyway. The outer wall it's there to be destroyed, really. One of the things that I wanted to test out during this playthrough was whether or not farms will stop animals spawning. So I went ahead and grabbed a tree farm, and later on I set it to not be harvested and not be planted. And I just made a fairly large area around the outside of that outer wall. It did seem to have an effect. No animals spawned on it. One of the things that I did notice though was that animals will spawn inside those craters that we currently can't get rid of. So it does seem to have limited uses if you are trying to implement it on a game you've already got set up. But I think if you're creating a new game and you just go ahead and throw a load of farmland out, it could be a very viable strategy. I will say that you can have quite large groups of animals actually spawn inside those craters as well. I actually, at one point, had to reload the game because Lava was just out and about. I think they just literally walked out of the base for about like 10 seconds. Like she was just picking up a little bit of wood. And then I had something like 200 animals spawn on her. I'm pretty sure it was mostly Scarebi and there was a couple of Junos, and it was just unavoidable. Like there was no way to stop her from dying because it wasn't a case that I hadn't seen it. It was they spawned, she died. That was how quick it was. She didn't walk into them. She didn't get near them. They spawned on top of her as she was going through one of those craters. And I'm all for, doing this completely legit and not cheesing it, but that's bullshit. And so I had no qualms about reloading the game. I couldn't find the footage of it, unfortunately, or I've obviously skimmed over it at some point, but I was like, nah, reloading. Nah, not doing that. At this point here, Emmeline and Naris had their first of many attempts to get married, and yeah, it just didn't work. It doesn't work. I don't know what's going on with this. I was a bit slow on this one to set everyone to do anything at the time when the wedding was going to be, but ever since then, I've always set them to do anything as soon as the notice has come up, and they've never got married, even though they've repeatedly actually got to the wedding arch on time. They've just never got married, so this is obviously broken. I thought you might want to see the fact that I did actually go out of my way to try and make sure that they did manage to get married. Nope, just doesn't work. At this point, I decided it's probably time for me to start going towards end game because I obviously wasn't going to get any more survivors. There was no point me training Vanessa up. The base seemed to be running quite nicely. There was a couple of improvements I wanted to do, so I decided to build the radio communication and then build the 2 antennas. I had kind of taken a guess on how much distance I needed between them when I built the base. That's because I have done this in the past. And as you can see, I was able to put them right in the corner of the main attack area. And that actually worked out really well. You'll see later on when I get my first attack when I turn them on. I also took the time to measure out the size of the landing pad. It is 7x7. I don't think I actually kept this design there. I think I switched it over later on. I tried to go for stone, which isn't strong enough. But yeah, it's 7x7 for you to be able to build a landing pad. I also had this attack coming in with the flying animals, and I didn't really feel like my current setup was enough to deal with them. It was fine if I had a lot of survivors on hand to be able to attack them, but I didn't feel like those pavilions were big enough, and I didn't think they were positioned in the right place. I had a bit of a concern that as I started getting rid of survivors when we started using the radio antenna, that I didn't think a fewer amount of survivors would actually hold out too well against a big flying attack. So that was something I wanted to address. As you can see, one of the first things I did was to move my pavilions forwards and make them a 3x3 with the carbon fiber. I didn't end up actually liking that position or the way they worked with the turrets. I didn't think they were in enough of the turret's field of fire. I realized I had more than enough electricity production and my batteries were overkill. I was getting so many breakdowns that I thought this is not something that's going to be sustainable as I start getting less and less survivors in the base. So I just started to try and streamline it and slim it down as much as possible. I also adjusted the front of the base. The idea was to move the poles out to the side so that I could create more turrets in there which would have a better field of fire. If they didn't have any poles in the way, they would be able to shoot backwards towards any creatures that were flying over the walls or coming from the back. And also it gave me a nice sort of wider area for people to be in to attack anything coming from the front. Once I decided on the position of where I wanted my turrets, and I'd figured out that where the poles were would definitely be able to reach at least 3 turrets there, I decided it was time to just move my pavilions right up to the front there. So they're right on the turrets, which kind of just maximized the amount of damage I would do to flying creatures. I actually got a full-on just flying attack come in not long after I got that finished up. So it was a good little fire test for it. And I think it worked out pretty well. Some people took a little bit of damage, but compared to what I had been dealing with before, this was much better. This was the biggest flying attack I'd had so far. And I had 1 or 2 people taking a little bit of damage, and the turrets did absolutely tons of damage against those things. Later on, I did plan to add another couple of turrets in there. I did seem to be able to scale them up more than the creatures, if that makes sense, in that I would be able to put more turrets out to deal with the creatures faster than the creatures would scale up with me putting the turrets there. I'm not sure that makes sense. It does in my head. Another thing that I did to try and really prepare myself for the amount of attacks I was going to have coming in was I put multiple people on as hunt as a high priority. Not to actually hunt things, but so that when I did get these big attacks, if I just set everything to be butchered, rather than just having Ken going over and butchering them and having to manually do him, I could have 3 people who were going to prioritize going over and getting all that insect meat, because I did want to make sure that I definitely had enough fuel to deal with any attacks coming in. As you can see, it does seem like the farms are actually doing their job. Things are spawning outside of it. Assuming they don't spawn inside one of the craters, they do seem to be spawning further away with those farms, which was quite nice. One of the things I did notice, though, was that the game started to really slow down when I was getting the attacks. This slowness that you're seeing here, that's not editing. That's the game just struggling to handle that amount of enemies. Later on, which will probably be the next episode, you'll see that when I get into like the 300s of attacks, it just slows to a crawl, even though it's set to the fastest speed. I did actually get the alien language technology research because I did have a plan. The idea was that as I was going to get less and less survivors in the base, I would start specializing in the things that people needed to cover. So the idea was that I would make Lava a crafter and I would make Ken a constructor and things like that. Ken was probably going to be the last person in the base, so I obviously wanted to give him enough specialities, I should say, so that he would be able to do everything efficiently. Unfortunately, I did forget that the first one of these sort of sources you go on is purely for intelligence, and I probably should have sent Naris off. But I also didn't do any more research after this point. It was just like, nah, let's just get it done. Let's get this finished up. Another little bit of preparation that I did was to just expand these walls out so far that my turrets definitely wouldn't be hitting anything until they were right on the corners of the main defense. So they definitely wouldn't hit them when they were in the process of pathing into the base. It was just something I'd noticed that had been a little bit of an issue. And yeah, I did find that made a big difference later on. It just stopped potentially triggering anything to go for the walls rather than do the main attack. The last thing to do was get the landing pad done. I had originally planned to build it out of carbon fiber, then changed my mind and tried to build it out of stone, then finally went to metal. But yeah, once it was done, it was time to test this out, see how it was going to go. One of the things I hadn't mentioned is that when I've been building my antennas and my radio, I had linked them to that button you can see on the back wall there, or this switch, just so that I can turn them on and off at will. Once I got the landing pad done, I decided it was time, well, crap or bust. We'll find out whether or not my preparation is going to pay off or not. So I just went ahead and turned the switch on, and immediately I got an animal attack coming in. As you can see, it's a fairly large animal attack, but compared to the other things we get attacked with, it's not really anything I was particularly panicking about. My main concern was whether or not they were going to path into the area that I had the antennas and go through the defenses. And yeah, they did. It worked out pretty well. I actually had a spaceship detected before they got in, so I sent Naris over and got him to contact them on the radio. The first one that we got was just a supply pod, so I got them to send down some fuel. I thought that was going to be important. But yeah, this is now in game. You know, at this point here, I mean, I could just turn off the antennas if I felt like I needed a little bit more preparation time or something like that. But I decided at this point, let's just go for it, because I'm aware that we do have a big patch coming in soon. So I just wanted to try and get it finished up, whether or not I manage to win or not. I think if I manage to get a few survivors off planet, I'll be happy, especially as this was hard mode and we had that big update drop halfway through this playthrough. I'll be quite happy with that. The defenses held up pretty well against the animals. They pathed in, they didn't try and attack the walls. So yeah, that was kind of like the last litmus test here. At this point, I thought, well, I'm just going to go for it. Let's just see how this turns out. As I said, if I manage to get a few people off world, I'll be quite happy with that. So the playthrough is now in end game. I hope you guys have found this useful so far, and it's, if anything, it's given you an idea of what to expect. The next video is going to be just the documentation of me trying to finish up the game. I actually haven't finished it yet. I know I do okay, but I don't know if I managed to win. So that's going to be interesting. I don't know how well it's going to go yet. I have got rid of a few survivors, but I haven't completed it. So yeah, that's something to look forward to. Now, I know we do have that big update coming soon, so I'm going to try and get that video out as soon as possible. I'm up to the possibility of doing another playthrough for the new map. Obviously, I won't have any sort of experience with it, so that's going to be interesting. But I will also say that I have reservations. If I see the patch notes and I don't see that they're addressing the AI or the spawning mechanics, I'm not sure I'm going to be comfortable doing it, because that's kind of a make or break for me, is that the AI clearly needs to be fixed. There clearly needs to be something addressed about the spawning mechanics. And if they haven't done it after 2 months, or they haven't at least acknowledged it after 2 months, I'm not sure I want to continue supporting the game. But we'll talk about that if you're interested in me doing another playthrough. But for now, my main priority is just to get the game finished up and let you see how that goes. I hope you guys are enjoying this series so far. Let me know if you got any feedback. Let me know if I screwed anything up in the comments. Have fun, guys. Catch you all soon. Bye.